There are old diagrams in which the intestinal tract is corresponded to the mysterious underworlds of Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost. This system of assimilation and finally the excretion of impurities comes in a sense under a purgatorial function. It is a mysterious realm in which what is not useful is discarded by a wisdom and skill that the human being could not personally apply any more than he could control completely the function of his own heart. If we depended upon man to keep the heart beating, he would forget it sometime and die on the spot. But the control is in an area which he cannot dominate. He can influence it. He can influence it for better and for worse. He can discipline it in certain mystical exercises. He can change its beat, rate, but if he does so without great skill, he may disorganize the entire structure, because that which abides in the heart is wiser than can be given to it by the mind. So we also then come into other areas of which it is important to take consideration. The ancients were particularly influenced by the shape of man, and usually represented this form either in a cross or in a five-pointed star. The five-pointed star is the form we find most commonly shown in old Pythagorean researches. It represents the body with its five major points: the head, the two arms, and the two legs. This form was the basis of most of the cathedrals of Europe. And of course the cruciform, standing person with feet together and arms spread out, became the cross. And in the center of the cross was always the symbol of life itself. And in the cruciform temple, the altar is in the place where the heart is. For it is at the altar that the Eternal speaks through the oracles of wisdom. So the shape of the body became quite important. And it was also more or less considered very essential that the individual recognize the need for the complete cooperation of the two sides of his own body. These two sides, the right and the left, are known to the ancients and were studied and symbolically considered. And it was assumed that the right side of the body was for defense and the left side for protection. The ancient Roman legionnaire carried his spear in the right hand and held his shield against the body with the left. We find discussions of this particular point in the Kabbalah, where the virtues, values, and problems involving the right and the left are very clearly set out. We also find them perpetuated in heraldry, where the 2 points or areas are of the greatest importance. Now, the problem of the hands, for example, or the feet, has to do with the manifestation of the individual in the daily activities and concerns of life. And it is obvious that we would be in very serious difficulty if any kind of political competition arose between these members. If we had a foot that was going in one direction and another foot that was going in the opposite direction, general progress would be hopelessly prevented. If we have two hands and one hand wishes to do one thing and the opposite hand wishes to do something else, which is incompatible or in contrary, we are in trouble. If we use the hands to knock someone down or to injure, this is a perversion of power. If we use the hands as a form of communication, as in the case of the deaf, they become very important means of carrying on a progress of some type of essential learning. The hands have many uses. Each finger has its own meaning. The feet have many uses and purposes. The lines of the hand have been the subject of a great deal of study, and in many instances it is obvious that they are very, very important. The problem, therefore, is that we have hands and feet. And these hands and feet have to work together. And in our material environment, hands and feet are symbolized by the machinery of productivity. The things that we have to do, the survival of the physical body in the presence of danger, transforms the hands and feet into legionnaires. They become the defenders of man. They become also the means for the expansion of his knowledge in many ways. And properly trained, they become magnificent instruments of the arts. And where they are there to guide us skillfully and physically through the problems of life, they have their part, and they are under mental control. Where, however, they give us great music, great art, wonderful appreciations for things, give us the opportunity to reveal from within ourselves something of the beauty that is there, then they are directly under the influence of the heart. And it is beauty, finally, that must redeem the rest. So we have in the body all kinds of interesting and more or less remarkable lessons. We find all types of processes, stress processes, mending processes, the constant replenishment of the body, the fact that it is one body, but that the life within it is manifold. And the individual, it has been said, and probably quite correctly, that by the end of a 7-year period, every cell in the human body has been changed. In the course of 100 years, every embodiment of man in the world is changed completely. Therefore, the continuity of the body depends upon the constant perpetuation of the life centers within it. Blood must reproduce itself, or we must have leukemia. We must have reproduction of the cells in every bone, in every muscle, in every nerve, or the structure falls apart. And this is where the principle of generation becomes very important. For generation is not only the reproduction of the species, it is the reproduction of the life units within the individual. He has to be constantly rebuilding. And when the body ceases to rebuild, then life has passed its peak. We cannot continue and go on any further. Now the body also contains the polarities of the sensory perceptions. These sensory perceptions in themselves are very important. Man in his evolution over thousands, millions of years has developed one by one the sensory perceptions as the environmental condition made them necessary. As soon as there was something to see, man could see it. As soon as there was something to hear, he could hear it. And every type of the sensory perception was geared to a purpose and to a value and to a need. Today, probably our most important sensory function is sight, which was the last to come to us and has been variously specialized in different kingdoms of nature. Sight to us is the ability to look out of a window. Now actually, of course, we think we're looking out, but actually the sight factor is not in the eye, but in the brain. But sight has given us a tremendous area of educational opportunity. It has made possible for us to be observers of existence. It has made it possible for us to see what is going on around us. And then locked within the brain is another eye, the single eye, by which we see gradually what is going on within us. But at the moment, sight is largely located in the area of perception. But the brain has a faculty to balance this, and that is reflection. Everything seen stimulates interpretation, stimulates some form of moral, ethical, or spiritual truth. It makes it possible for us to observe both virtues and vices. It gives us the possibility to study the whole balance of nature. And by means of sight, the individual gains his greatest physical orientation, as far as he is capable of such orientation at the present time. But it is obvious that sight as we know it is not complete. It is also a known fact that the capacity of the brain has not yet been fully recognized. For the most part, we are thinking on the surface of the brain structure. But there is a dimension of depth to it, and the brain is capable of a vast improvement or a vast extension of its own powers. But at the present moment, sight becomes almost a contact with the divine plan. We look around us and we see things, and we like some of them and we dislike others. We watch things created and beautiful. We watch things disintegrate and tear down and fail. These are all experiences of sight. But they are very important because to see the environment in which we exist is to be aware of it more acutely than by any other faculty. And therefore it is the one great educator that we have among the sensory perceptions. It is the power to estimate. It builds into the brain mechanism the structure of discrimination, the structure of comparisons, and also it brings us in direct focus to the operations of cause and consequence. Cause and effect are probably more obvious to us through sight than through any other faculty that we possess. But all the faculties have their proper places and their proper endowments. Each one has a message. Each one is a messenger. Actually, we have given comparatively little attention to the evolution of sensory perceptions. We take them all for granted. We do not realize that they can be greatly improved. We do not try to balance them. We do not try to create a powerful cooperation between them. We simply accept them and are very little mindful of them unless they fail us. Then we suddenly find that some phase of life has been slowly taken away from us. So the sight centers, the sensory perceptions, and all these contacts are in a way the way in which the person becomes oriented, because the person becomes aware of things. Now, when the moment the five senses operate together and awareness is established, everything then depends upon the function of the mental coordinator, because things seen can be nullified by attitudes. That which might in itself be important is disregarded by an indifferent mental mechanism. That which to the mind is not important can gain strange importance in the sensory perceptions, and sometimes this results in an extension of knowledge. But in all these different areas, the sensory perceptions have to be refined. They also have to be improved, and they must be brought into a cooperative relationship. Whereas today, no matter how many people look at the same thing, it looks different to all of them. This is due to limitations within the individual. And these limitations are artificial, because in reality, all things seen are the same when seen by all people. But immediately the sight factor itself is compromised by ulterior mental attitudes, so that we lose a great part of the virtue of these various sensory perceptions that have been so carefully and wisely developed. The body, therefore, does manifest through sensory function, and through this function gains a new and more complete perspective upon the circumstances under which the body is going to subsist for a time. All this together and very, very much more brings us to the final realization that this body is indeed a sacred thing, that it has been given to us for a reason, for a purpose. It has been bestowed upon us that we might grow, that we might improve, that we might strengthen our resolutions, and that most of all we should be true to it, not to cater to it, but to preserve it in the best normal way that we can. In so doing, We will protect our own mental and emotional normalcy.